I want to introduce you all to what has become my favorite Metroidvania experience since Hollow Knight. And once you see what we're working with here, you might be a little bit surprised. This is Astalon, Tears of the Earth. Yes, this humble little outdated-looking game hides beneath it one of my favorite Metroidvania games of recent memory, and if its Steam page is anything to go by, it has gone criminally underappreciated and under the radar by many people. Those of you who have been around since the absolute inception of my channel, or are otherwise well-versed in clown lore, may recognize aspects of this game, because it was created in part by the developer behind the very first game that I dared to create a Let's Play of on this channel.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Ingenious Clown Plays. Yep, I'm doing a Let's Play.
Astalon wasn't created solely by Matt Cap like Castle in the Darkness was, but the retro charm and style that he lovingly inserts into his games is literally all I can see while playing this title. I know that between Phoenotopia and this game, a lot of you have probably already become completely dehydrated from your continuous projectile vomiting over all of this pixel art, but man, I'm in my mid-30s now and I absolutely adore this stuff. Okay, so the basic story is this. Two hot idiots and a wizard walk into a tower to try and save their home from the corruption that it's spreading, and find themselves embroiled in quite a big adventure. Again, the story is the least of my worries for these kinds of games, but it is nice to have an in-game reason to keep pushing forward. How does it play though? It may not surprise you to find out, but Astalon plays pretty much how it looks. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is up to you, but someone like me who's a big fan of not only the retro aesthetics, but also more simplistic retro controls, this is great. Some people may scoff at this like, what's the big deal? All you can do is run and jump and attack. And you'd definitely be correct with that assessment of the gameplay, but in my humble opinion, simple controls with simple choices puts the onus on the design of the world and its enemies and the core elements of controlling the characters to carry the game. There's not much of a skill ceiling to aspire to because there isn't exactly a lot of nuance to controlling your characters, but if the world is engaging to explore and the enemies and playable characters are designed in a way that makes them fun to fight with, then the simplicity doesn't matter. That's exactly where Astalon lands for me. I typically really love games with movement systems that allow for creative expression and sick navigation, but that tends to be really difficult to do correctly or in a way that feels more satisfying than frustrating. In Astalon, while you do have three main characters to explore the game with, the true main character of this game is the tower that you're exploring and all the secrets that lie within it. The characters are just a vessel to help you uncover what's hidden behind the ancient walls of this monolithic structure, and everything within it is so lovingly and deliberately crafted that it's an absolute joy to navigate and explore. Sure, this game is a couple of years old by now, but it was one of my favorite Metroidvania games of recent memory, and has remained relatively unknown and criminally underappreciated with how good that I think it is. I think I know why that's the case though. Astalon makes a bit of a bold choice when it comes to Metroidvania design. It inserts roguelite elements into its structure. These elements are minor in the grand scheme of the game, but at the beginning of the game it can feel like a daunting task to tackle a game world that's as surprisingly large as this one is. You see, healing and health pickups are in very short supply in this game. Every bit of damage you take while exploring the tower and fighting its enemies might as well be permanent with how little healing it offers in return, and can make the game and its encounters feel devastatingly punishing for a first-time player. However, aside from your usual Metroidvania trappings of finding new abilities and keys that allow you to progress further through the game's world, there's another progression structure in which you spend currency you earn from killing monsters and finding treasure to permanently and significantly power up your character's stats. The only way you can get stronger is by dying and spending that currency, and those power-ups will better equip you to go ever deeper into the tower. That's where the roguelite elements begin and end though. In fact, it's a lot like Dark Souls, at least in the way where you'll die a lot and respawn at a fire with all the enemies having respawned. You keep everything else you collected, all the power-ups and map progress stick with you through your reincarnation. And you might be wondering why I mentioned roguelite elements ahead of like Dark Souls with the way this respawning mechanic works, and the best that I can tell you is that, well, that's kind of what it feels like at first when you initially dive into this game. Your scope of knowledge of the world within the tower is so small that dying literally feels like just starting a new run. and the currency that you spend in between deaths isn't outside of the realm of meta progression that a lot of roguelites on the market already employ. It's not until you unlock your first shortcuts that the game's structure really starts to take shape. And once you finally unlock your first fast travel point or two, do you really begin to understand what this game is. And by now you've probably noticed that you control all three of the characters that I mentioned earlier, albeit one at a time. Early on in the game, you can only switch characters at a campfire, which can feel terribly constricting, but soon you'll unlock the ability to freely swap between each character, which allows you to utilize each one's unique strengths as necessary to conquer the game's challenges. This isn't exactly a unique gimmick, but it's at least rare enough that I can't name a game off the top of my head other than Trine that employs this kind of gameplay, and that game both wasn't a Metroidvania and was designed mainly with co-op in mind. Castlevania Portrait of Ruin for the Nintendo DS has a similar setup with its two protagonists, but Astalon really makes a point to tie most of the tower's exploration and progression to specific characters' abilities in a much bigger and more apparent way. Movement abilities and stat power-ups are constrained to individual characters, guaranteeing that you'll be swapping between each one countless times as you make your way through the tower. You'll probably end up with a favorite or two that you'll stick with for most of the game, but there's just enough variety injected into the game's very soul that this gimmick helps keep things feeling fresh and interesting as you progress. So the main loop ends up being explore, fight, die, power up, and repeat. A tried and true system if there ever was one. The world itself is incredibly dense, filled with all manner of secret paths and collectibles, and a surprising number of different areas that you'll uncover as you push ever deeper into the tower. You'll find yourself constantly backtracking through older areas as you power up and gain new abilities, less out of the typical sense of Metroidvania obligation, and more as a result of an intense, intrinsic curiosity piqued by the path that blocked you previously. It's the kind of feeling that a Metroidvania wants to instill in the player, but Astalon somehow manages to pull this off perfectly. And to top everything off, this game is filled with a bunch of really fun and creative bosses. None of them are particularly challenging, due in part to the game's sort of meta power-up system, where you can purchase power with currency that you find during your adventures. But they're a delight to find and defeat. I want to avoid showing or talking about more than I already have, because when it comes to these kinds of games, I'm a big believer in the idea that even showing aspects of the gameplay, or what kinds of power-ups you end up with, are spoilers that are much better discovered by actually playing the game yourself. So what are you waiting for? I consider Astalon Tears of the Earth an absolute must-play for any Metroidvania fan. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that literally everyone will love it, because like I said in my Ender Lilies video, not every good game is everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. But I believe Astalon belongs up there with some of the genre's greatest hits, and the fact that it's got such a small amount of attention since its release is heartbreaking. But because of his success at crafting one of my favorite Metroidvania experiences in recent years, I can officially say that I'm a fan of Matt Cap's games, and am very much looking forward to playing Castle in the Darkness 2 when it's ready. Thanks for watching.